It's July 15th, 2018, and this is at Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming, episode 0.16. Let's get this show on the road. And we're ready to roll today. Our featured distribution this week is Antegros 18.7 with the GNOME desktop environment. You can see me running it here. This is an absolutely gorgeous distribution. We've been testing. I mean, our approach here is to basically try to use a different distro for every episode. We've used Ubuntu. We've used Solus. We've used Manjaro. This week we're going with Antegros. This is 18.7. And I am not exaggerating when I say that this is my new favorite distribution. I am not, as a disclosure here, I am not a Linux technology expert. I am a user, I am an enthusiast, I am a podcaster, I am a gamer, but I am not a developer, computer programmer, sysadmin. And sometimes I get some blowback from people saying, I'm saying that things are, or the way that I describe stuff is in a very general way, and that's because I describe things the way that I understand them. Having said that, my evolution on Linux, as with many people, began with a flavor of Ubuntu, maybe 12.4. And then I went on to Linux Mint, and I've tried a whole bunch of different things until I landed eventually on Solus. Solus being a built from scratch distribution of Linux that is a rolling release. I really, really like Solus, and I would basically say to anybody that is starting Linux for the first time, I would recommend that you begin with Solus. Solus is the best desktop operating system for new users and for power users that want updated technology delivered to their system in terms of kernels and that kind of thing, but don't want to fiddle around with stuff. But I like to fiddle around with things. I mean, that's kind of goes, hat in hand with being an enthusiast. And so I eventually saw my way over to Manjaro and really liked that. Manjaro was my first taste of Arch. And Arch is often labeled, an advanced user's flavor of Linux, which kind of scared me off for a long time from moving to Arch, particularly as somebody that is an enthusiast rather than a developer, programmer, Linux expert. But I found Manjaro to be a nice kind of gateway, entryway to the Arch side of things. Last week, I decided to give Antegros a try, and I was not very familiar with Antegros. I mean, I'd heard of it, obviously, because I decided to launch it up, and it is fantastic. It is really, really good. But let me just talk a little bit about it. So here you can see I'm using Antegros. I've got the GNOME desktop environment. It comes in different desktop environments. But what I particularly like about Antegros is the fact that it's designed to be open enough to allow the user to make it their own. The ISO, for example, when you're installing it, comes with, in the launch options, you can choose whatever type of desktop environment that is supported, including KDE, including Cinnamon, including a whole bunch of other ones. And you just basically can select it from the launch. And the launch process in terms of installing Antegros is probably the best that I've experienced so far. It provides you with enough hand-holding that you're not lost, but enough flexibility to make the system right from scratch your own. Now let me just kind of talk a little bit about Antegros here. It is a rolling release. Well, let me just read right here. Rolling release. Antegros is a rolling release distribution. Your entire system, from the base OS components to the applications that you install, will receive updates as they are released upstream with only a minimal delay to ensure stability. And I think that is the key difference here. There are quite a few, but the key difference that I see between Antegros and Manjaro is that Antegros basically rolls down the updates at a more rapid pace than Manjaro. And as I've mentioned before, more rapid updates mean the possibility that something is going to break. So if you're willing to take the risk that something, may mess up your system a little bit, which would require some Google searching to find out what is going on. This is a fresher operating system. Fresher meaning it updates more quickly. The system is very easy. As I said, it's very easy to install. It provides you with a lot of flexibility. It offers multiple desktop environments for the users to use, and it is fairly seamless. I have had no problems whatsoever with Antegros at all. It works. It works very well. They basically promote it as Antegros for everyone, and I would say to anyone out there looking for a new distribution or looking to try or test drive something, I would definitely go with Antegros. It's terrific. The main, one of the things, I won't say the main thing because there's so much I like about this flavor. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Arch is access to the AUR, which is the Arch user repository. And what the AUR does is it is a repository maintained by the user base. And there's a risk there that you're warned about because the users can put stuff up that may not work well. Recently, there was some concerns, some shenanigans going on with respect to possible spyware being uploaded into the repository. So you got to keep your wits about you when you're dealing with a user repository. But I think that is, I don't want to overblow that risk. That risk exists. We saw that Gentoo got hacked last week. It happens. Keep your wits about you and make sure that you know when you're installing something where it's coming from. But the main benefit of the user repository is that it provides access to pretty well everything written for Linux, distributed for any flavor that you may want. There is one of the things I don't like about Solus, which is why I've moved on from that, is that it is highly protective of its operating system to make sure that only those packages that it allows are available on its repositories. So, for example, your driver is going to be updated when they believe that it is sufficiently stable for you to be able, for it to be released downstream. Likewise, there are apps like, for example, Crossover. They're just not available. They're not in the repository. You can go and download the Debian file and extract it and try to install it that way. But, if you're using Solus, that's probably beyond what you want to do. And I find that restrictive. I find that the benefit, and I've mentioned this before, and one of the reasons that I sometimes keep going back to Solus is it is super, super stable. But it is more limited. Now, what Antegros does is, and Arch in general, this goes for Manjaro as well, is that it gives you access to the Arch user repository, the AUR. And what I'll type up here is, I'm just going to go into Yout. There's a GUI available, and what you can see here is you can go into the user repository, and basically any package designed for anything, anywhere, is going to be available here. If you're trying to update, for example, I know that in many cases, if you're trying to run Blizzard apps, there's a whole bunch of dependencies that you need to install. You can just basically find every single thing here in this one place. You don't have to use Yout. I like Yout. I know, again, if you become a super expert, there's pros and cons between Yout versus PackAUR versus Pacman. There's a whole bunch of different package managers, and I've read internal battles between zealots over one versus the other. I don't care necessarily about that, at least not at this point. Maybe at some point I will. But every package is available. Everything. Every time I have clicked here for a package from anything, anywhere, it is available, packaged up, and it builds it from source, so that I don't have to kind of worry about anything being tampered. It goes into the system, builds it from source, and I can run it. Let me give you an example of that. Let me just kind of get out of here. One of the apps, I guess, is the best way to say it, that I really like is the built-in platform in Peppermint 9. Peppermint OS is an Ubuntu-based distribution that has something called ICE or ICE built in. And ICE is a terrific little app that allows you to effectively create clickable apps from web browsers. So you can see here I've got Gmail, I've got Outlook. You can create your own. In fact, why don't I create one right now for Bloomberg TV, for example, which I like to listen to or watch for business news. Now, ICE is an SSB, so it's a single source browser manager. What it does is it basically will run the web page in a dedicated browser, so that it kind of comes across like an app, almost like an Electron style app. And you can design the icon and run it as you see fit. And I like Peppermint 9 largely because of ICE. But if I'm using Arch, in particular Antegros here, I can just basically go into the repository and install ICE on it. Now, presumably this is doable on other distributions. I haven't tried it on other distributions, Ubuntu or Solus or whatever. And if I'm mistaken and it runs, then I apologize up front. But I can tell you that whatever way that it would be doable there was more difficult than going to the Arch user repository, typing in the name, and boom, I've got it running. So now let me just kind of make this clear. This is a Peppermint 9 OS. I was going to actually run Peppermint 9 as our distribution of the week here, but I was having some difficulty getting the mic to work on Peppermint 9, and I'm sure it's something on my end rather than Peppermint 9s, but I just got to the point where I said, okay, forget it. I'll go with Antegros this week, and maybe I'll try Peppermint 9 again next week. But with ICE, you can type in, for example, here, the name of the app, which is Bloomberg TV, and then I'm going to put in the web address here, which is bloomberg.com/TV. This is in the menu. I want it to appear under, let's keep it at Internet. And then I can choose the browser that I want it to run in. Let's choose Chromium here. I can choose the favicon, and it automatically builds it for me from the website. And then I can apply it. And now I have the site as an app. So if I type Bloomberg here, you can see it popping up over there. And now it will launch as a dedicated browser page. That has its own icon, and it's kind of more akin to basically an app rather than a browser tab. And for things that you want to basically run in a dedicated app, I can go over here now. I can add it to my favorites, and I can just basically click it and run it as an app with a single click. It's not a big thing, and it's not even an Antegros thing, but it is nice to be able to reach out to other distributions and grab some of their cool apps. So that's Antegros. That's our distribution of the week. As I said earlier on, I really like Antegros. I think I'm going to keep this as my main gaming distribution on this 4K machine here, just because of the flexibility that it gives me. So that's that. We'll be running it this episode throughout, so you can see how it works. It's basically as a front end, it's Gnome. So if you know Gnome, you'll know how this works and what it looks like. But give it a shot. I really like it. I would highly recommend it. As I said, it's my favorite distribution so far. Speaking of favorites, I guess my viewers are my favorites, because last week we had an episode with ridiculous audio quality. I forewarned everybody both at the beginning of the episode and in the notes that, hey, this was filmed off-site. I was away in Northern Ontario at a bit of a vacation. There was wind noises. The quality was just horrendous, but I decided to post it anyway. And it was one of our most listened to, downloaded episodes ever. And I don't know why, other than the fact that maybe the user base is growing, which we've seen some really good growth in the user base as well. But I wanted to thank all of our listeners for bearing with us with this, the horrible sound quality. Hopefully the sound quality is better this week. I've got a new mic. It's a blue it's a blue ball and it's right here in front of me. Hopefully the sound is coming through. I won't I did some testing. It sounds okay. Certainly it'll be better than it was last week. But thank you very much for listening and for tuning in. Feel free to retweet and tell your friends. We certainly want to increase our viewer base. It's nice to get people listening when you're recording and putting this stuff out there. And hopefully the quality overall, both sound and content, is to your liking. If you want to send us a note, questions, comments, feedback, you can send it to us via Twitter at mostly_Linux, or you can send me an email to mostlylinux@protonmail.com. We also have a Steam user group, mostly_Linux there as well. You can search for Mostly Linux on Steam and join our group. We'd be happy to have you there as well. We've also started posting our videos. We have most of our listeners listen to us via the audio podcast, mostlylinux.libsyn.com. That's lybsin.com, where you can subscribe via Apple, Google, Stitcher, whatever, podcast listener you want, or just via the RSS feed and stick it into whatever Feedly or whatever else you like to track things with. But we do post them up, here on Twitch, where we premiere the episode, not live, it's pre-recorded, but the episodes premiere on on twitch.tv/mostlylinux. And typically we get a few, listeners, viewers coming into the chat, and we'd more than, be happy to have you join us in the chat there for this and future episodes. And also on YouTube. But we've started, posting on PeerTube as well. We have, we set up a PeerTube page, and we started posting it there. And I am actually quite happy and impressed to mention that most of our video listeners come through, most of our video views come through PeerTube rather than YouTube or Twitch. In fact, we had more people coming into PeerTube for episode 0.15 than YouTube or Twitch combined. Now, we're not getting a huge number of views. I would say total between all of those is about 40 views, which is about half of what we get on the audio podcast, a little less than half. But more than half of the video views come through PeerTube. And I haven't been, it's not, I'm promoting one over the other. What I do is I post, I post the podcast up to Twitch and to PeerTube and to YouTube, and I promote all three of them equally. They're just, links. And people are choosing to hit the PeerTube link rather than the other ones, and that makes me happy. Actually, I would like to see PeerTube do well. It's more of a peer-to-peer distributed system. The quality is fine. There's no advertising whatsoever, and there's nobody spying on what we're listening to or watching or trying to target us with telemetry. So. Thank you very much to everybody who's been joining us, both audio and video viewers. And finally, here on the small talk section is our stream of the episode. This week is going to be for our video viewers. You can see that we're streaming here the Overwatch League. This is a repeat of the Overwatch League playoffs, where Boston versus Philadelphia were playing yesterday. That would be Friday. The show is recorded on a Saturday, but it airs on Sunday. And it is very enjoyable to watch professional esports done in such a professional, with such a professional dedication that Blizzard is putting into it. It's high quality. It's very entertaining. Philadelphia won the quarterfinal yesterday against Boston Uprising, two games to one. The first game it was Philadelphia, and then the second game Boston came back and won that series 3-0. I think it was quite a rout. And then the tiebreaker, Philadelphia came back and took the win. So Philadelphia will be playing the number 1 ranked New York Excelsior in the semifinal. And yesterday, from when you're listening to this, or today from when I'm recording it, the other quarterfinal will be going Los Angeles Gladiators versus the London Spitfire. Los Angeles just kicked their butt in the first game. So it doesn't look good for London, although, I've got a bit of a soft spot for London. I was cheering for England in the World Cup as well. I would like to see London come back and take it, but there is something to be said for a semifinal between the two LA-based teams, because the Los Angeles Valiant will meet whoever wins between the Los Angeles Gladiators and the London Spitfires. So that could be an interesting local competition between the two LA teams if the Gladiators take it. So I would, if you're into esports, if you're into Overwatch, but even if you're not into Overwatch, if you're into watching highly competitive, amazing skills in a sport, it is very entertaining and highly enjoyable, and I will be watching that Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Anyway, that's our small talk for this week. I'll be back in 10 seconds with our news feed. And welcome back. Thanks for joining us here for episode 0.16 at Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming News Feeds. First thing I'm going to talk about here is just what's on my on the left side here of my Firefox browser for those watching on the video. Notes by Firefox was launched to their beta channel for the browser and for Android. And Notes by Firefox, which I think is the official name, is basically a Google Keep competitor. You can see I use Google Keep here for managing my episode notes. And I've got it over here now on my Firefox browser as well. It's basically a Google Keep alternative. But as with so much of what Mozilla does, it is not going through their servers. So, when you're putting something through Google Keep, it goes through Google servers. They can use, they can read and see and do anything that they want with the information. I gather what they use it for is profiling the users. They can see whatever your notes say, and then they can use that to better target you with advertising. But what Mozilla has done over here is they've launched the Android app, and in order to basically run the app on your phone, you have to install the extension on your browser here. So you can see, if you're looking on the video, up to the top right, I've got the browser extension for Notes. And then what it does is it synchronizes between your devices that you've got hooked up to your Firefox account. So it basically takes the feed from your phone that is stored locally, and then when your browser asks for the information from the notes, it synchronizes them from your phone. And then likewise with any device. So as far as I know, this does not go through Mozilla's servers from the perspective of telemetry or tracking or that kind of stuff. It's effectively a peer-to-peer system. It cannot work unless you have at least two devices that can synchronize with each other, which is kind of cool. I like to have non-invasive, tracked, non-telemetry focused apps as an alternative to to the Google stuff, which for most of us, Google is pervasive and involved with everything that we do. The downside is just that it's not there yet. Firefox or Notes by Firefox is just not of the same polishment level, let's say, as Google Keep, and that's it's fair enough. It's still a beta, and I'm hoping that it improves over time. The biggest issue that I have with it that is preventing me from using it as my daily driver and keeping Google Keep up here is that there, if you have a phone, an Android phone, when I'm going through my Feedly or my Newsfeeds or whatever on my phone, or even on a browser page on my Firefox browser, there is a share option, and I can take the site or whatever that I'm looking at and then share it through to any one of a number of apps, including, let's say, Google Keep. And that is a very effective way of being able to take the site and then stick it into Google Keep with a couple of taps. And for whatever reason, Notes is not available in those share options. I've got share options for everything else, for Twitter, for everything basically, but Notes is not a share option. And I'm not sure if there's a way for me to change that. I'm not sure if it's because it's a beta software. I'm not sure if it's just maybe because Firefox hasn't turned it on. But once they can turn on that sharing option, I will definitely try to give that a go as a replacement for Google Keep, because it will be able to synchronize my topics or pages or items or things that I want to share and store in an easily accessible area. So that's Notes by Firefox. Worth a run if you want to give it a shot. If you're using Google Keep or some other note pad. Not there, but it's a good start as an alternative. So that's that. A couple of other things here. One is somebody. Let me just actually find it here. Somebody put together a DXVK playable games list, and let me open up the link and we can take a look at it here. Is this the person's name? Lucade, Lucade 328. Yes, this seems to be the username of the person that put it together. Lucade 328 put together a list of DXVK playable games, which I think is a terrific resource for anybody looking to play some Windows games on their Linux distribution. I took a look at this, and it is quite extensive. He has them listed alphabetically here, so you can find a game that you're looking for. He has them, kind of a status listed beside them in terms of whether they're fully playable or just running, and then he has them also linked by video to evidence that they are working. And I haven't counted them, but there is a very good, strong list of games here. I'm gonna say maybe 100 games that are listed here. It's a terrific resource if you're looking just to basically see if a game works on Linux, via Lutris or DXVK in general. sometimes I've found that the wine app database is old, sometimes not up to date. And, so it'll say there that a game doesn't work when indeed it does work quite well. So this is quite good. I will say that this is not, it's not guaranteed. There are some games that I have tried here, for example, that are playable but not perfectly playable. For example, Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age here, for example, is listed as playable. And to be clear, it is, but it is not fully... it doesn't work with the controller, I guess, is the issue there. But if you are happy to play it with a keyboard and mouse, it will work without a problem whatsoever. So it's a great resource. Nothing is perfect, but it required an incredible amount of work to put together and to basically search them and make it searchable. So hats off to Lucade 238. Does this person have... I don't see a Twitter account. I would like to thank Lucade 328. Maybe he's or she, I'm not sure what the gender is, but maybe he's on Reddit, and I can go back and post a thank you, because this is a terrific resource. The other terrific resource that was added recently is this, which I believe is... No, it's over here. I've got both of my note apps here running, and they're not completely synced. It's the top 31 free Linux games. Let's kind of click on the link. Top 31 free Linux games. It's Foss, which is itsfoss.com, itsfoss.com, put together a list of 31... Well, the headline is Top 31 Best Linux Games You Can Play for Free. I'm not sure if it's all 31, or if they just kind of found a whole bunch of them. But they did rank them, so I'll give them that. And they just have them listed on a single site here on itsfoss.com/free-linux-games. Pretty cool. You can see it here. They've labeled Dota 2 as the best game. I'm not a Dota player, but certainly that is the most popular free game available on Steam. Followed by... Well, let me just go through the top 10 that they've listed here. I won't go through all of them. You can take a look at it yourself. I'll put the link in the show notes. So number 1 is Dota 2. Number 2 is another Valve game, Team Fortress 2, which is a terrific game. Number 3 is War Thunder. Number 4 is Whack Fu, which is a new... I haven't heard of this before. Whack Fu is a grid-based MORPG game which every anime fan would love to have installed. It is really an interesting free-to-play online strategy RPG game that has humor baked into it as well. The game features 18 different classes to choose from, and whatever role you pick, everything depends on it. And you can see that for every game that they have listed here, they've got a clickable download thing. So Whack Fu is available on Steam. You can basically click the link and go and run it. Whoa, why am I getting... That's no good, it's Foss. Foss just basically hit me with like a page covering little promotion for its site, which, hey, I'm on your site. I respect your right to do that, but that's bad form. Anyway, number 5 is Fishing Planet, which looks very cool. I've downloaded that already. I'm going to give that a shot. Big part of what I was doing up in Northern Ontario was fishing, and I had a lot of fun back in the Sega Dreamcast games with my custom Sega fishing controller, playing Sega Bass Fishing. It'd be great if I could actually connect a fishing controller to this and use it. I'll look into that. Number 6 is Star Conflict, which is an action drive space simulation game. Star Conflict is a massively multiplayer game which includes both PvP and PvE. Number 7 is Robocraft, which is basically an online robot-based, looks like a multiplayer shooter. Number 8 is Adventure Capitalist. Number 9 is Brain Out, which looks like a zombie killing game. Brain Out is a 2D multiplayer shooter with a post-Soviet setting. That's an interesting one. It's a 2D multiplayer shooter, zombie killing, post-Soviet game. I mean, that's kind of crazy, but it's out there available for free if you want to give it a shot. And number 10 is Wild West Saga Idle Tycoon. This game revolves around the Wild West, where you get the chance to become a billion-dollar pioneer by starting several businesses and exploring more business opportunities. So that's that link there. These types of resources are obviously very, very good for game discovery, and I like to kind of give like a 3 cheers to those that put them together. But if there's not enough games for you to play between the 100 or so DXVK playable games, or the 31 free games that we've just listed, wouldn't it be cool if we could use Nvidia's GeForce Now streaming service on Linux? Unfortunately, there's no Linux client, and that makes me sad because, if we... streaming could be very good for Linux. One of the biggest complaints that people have about moving full-time to Linux is access to their game library. And while it's getting better and better in terms of, last week we went through the top best-selling games on Steam so far in 2018, and, we concluded that somewhere in the order of about 70% of them, between Wine and DXVK and Native, were fully playable on Linux. And that's a far cry from where we were. About, I would say 30% of them seem to be native, and then, another 40% of them were fully playable, leaving, 25 to, say, 35% that you just can't run on a Linux desktop right now. But if you, which is good, but if you have that game that you want to play, and it's just one of those 25 or 35% that are not playable, and I'll say there's League of Legends, which is very popular, and that's not working right now as far as I know. There's Fortnite, of course. There's PUBG. There's a number of these very, very popular games out there that are just not playable at all. And a streaming service, while, there's going to be some lag, with any streaming service, the improvements that have been made on streaming services over the last number of years have been tremendous, to the point where you can, unless you're a pro, you can reasonably play games effectively lag-free from, a user perspective. And GeForce Now is Nvidia's service, which effectively streams your own Steam library to whatever device that you are using. So you don't have to go out and buy games again. If you've got them on Steam, you're basically logging into your Steam or your Origin or your Epic or whatever your account might be, and then playing your own games via streaming from a remote graphics card. And what Nvidia wants to do is it wants to rent you time on their GTX 1080 Ti server bank. So, in an ideal situation, you don't need to have a really powerful desktop on the other side. You can just basically rent the 1080 Ti from Nvidia using whatever their pricing plan is, which I might add right now seems to be a little bit pricey, and then play all of your games via streaming on your TV or on your laptop or on your Nvidia Shield tablet. So they've recently added the Nvidia Shield to the service. Of course, there's Windows and Mac OS. But what's missing is, of course, Linux. And Nvidia is marketing this as Experience GeForce Gaming Anywhere. And I would just say to Nvidia, anywhere is a pretty broad term. And Linux is something. So, when you say anywhere, that's not entirely true. I guess I would say it's also not available on iPads or Android devices. But to the extent, I really want Linux clients. And I would think that there's probably a good level of pent-up demand from Linux users for a service like this. Because if I had this as an alternative, I would not need to boot into Windows ever. And right now, even with DXVK and the improvements in Wine and my huge Linux native library on my 4K system here, I have a dual boot. Because I have a lot of games that I want to be able to play, and I want to be able to play Final Fantasy 12, for example, with a controller rather than the keyboard and mouse, and I just can't do that. And so I boot into Windows to do it. And in fact, a couple of episodes, I think 0.14, we actually had a bit of a tutorial on how to set up your Windows desktop to be as compatible as possible with your Linux partition in a dual boot system, which you might want to go back to 0.14 and check it out. But I see streaming and beyond just streaming, Electron are technologies that will provide greater access to the wider universe of applications out there. And yet, look, I hear the complaints about Electron, native is better, and blah, 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 blah. But come on, if we want to stay on Linux full time, we need access to apps that are not available right now. And to the extent that, there's a move to Electron for greater compatibility among Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and Linux, then we will get access to all of the applications out there that do not have a native build. I don't see Electron as replacing native apps necessarily. I see it as providing apps that wouldn't come anyway. And I see streaming services like GeForce Now as being something similar, that that it could help increase the Linux user base, because the cost of switching to Linux will decrease because you don't have to give up as much. And that is, I think, the biggest barrier. Look, we talk about the barriers to entry to Linux for new users. Those are it. Apps and games. If you have your apps through Electron, and you have your games through native DXVK and then someday soon streaming. I would say that is the foundation for a larger migration from, Mac or Windows over to Linux, because I think people that use Linux genuinely enjoy and prefer it. So that's that. I guess that's a bit of a contentious point. I can understand if you disagree and think that it will limit native games. We can agree to disagree on that, I guess, is the way that I look at it. Speaking of native games, however, last week I talked about Pillars of Eternity 2 not running, and it didn't run, and I kind of asked whether it was broken. I'm just going to touch back a little bit on that because I have figured out what the problem was. I'm not sure it was an Obsidian side error. It probably was a mixture of things, but the what I have since discovered is that Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire needs some tweaking to work in Arch distributions, and I did a little bit of digging. And I found this post over here, which somebody else had run into a similar problem. And the solution is you take this command and you put it into the launch options of Pillars of Eternity 2 on your on your Arch distribution, whether you're using Vanilla Arch or Antegros or Manjaro. You need to add this to the launch options. I won't read it out, but you can do a search and find it, or maybe I'll post it into the show notes for anybody that is looking for the command. You stick that into the launch options on Arch based distributions, and it will launch without a hitch. On my XPS 13, which I recorded last episode on with an Ubuntu Budgie distribution, it wasn't running there, and I haven't figured out completely why, other than the fact that it was looking for a DLL file that it was not finding where it thought it would be. And on my XPS 13, which has a 256 gig SSD, I have a secondary 1 terabyte drive that I use for running games. And I installed this on that secondary USB-based hard drive, and that was the problem. I'm not inclined to really kind of go figure out exactly what tweaks might be necessary to keep it there. I just basically deleted it from the HDD, moved it to the SSD, and it ran. So a little bit of tweaking on both sides. I've been able to get it running. My biggest issue with Pillars of Eternity 2 right now is that it doesn't appear to support cloud saves. It seems at times that it looks for a cloud save, or it tries to sync to the cloud, but it fails. And I'm not sure if this is something that works on Windows and it's a problem for the Linux distribution, but cloud save is broken. And so I lost my 10 hours of gameplay, in between upgrading Linux distributions at some point, which is unfortunate. But, be forewarned, Pillars of Eternity 2 can be played with some tweaking if you have a non-standard distribution, or if you're using it in a way that maybe they haven't anticipated. But again, there is, it can still use a little bit more work. And finally, here on our news feed, I just want to congratulate James Ohlen. Let's find them over here. James Ohlen is or was creative director, lead designer of Star Wars, The Old Republic, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Neverwinter Nights, Star Wars, KOTOR, and Dragon Age. He is now no longer at EA's BioWare. He has been liberated from Electronic Arts, and we are very happy to have him back. I'm not familiar with James Ohlen, though I do love much of the work that he has done over the years. I mean, those are some of my favorite games of all time that this gentleman has been working on. He also was involved with let me just see his resignation tweet. After 22 years, this is from Twitter, I have retired from BioWare. I've loved my time with Anthem, Star Wars, Dragon Age, and Dungeons & Dragons, but I need to take a break from the industry and work on something a little smaller and more personal. And so, as I said, your liberation has been noted, James, and we look forward to your continued or your return to contributing some great work with some great storytelling, not only to the gaming community, but also to just the general content environment. So his project right now is something called Arcanum Worlds, Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. The website here, if you want to check them out, is arcanumworlds.com, ARCANUMWORLDS, arcanumworlds.com. Odyssey of the Dragon Lords is our first project, is a hardcover source book for the 5th edition of the world's greatest role-playing game. This epic adventure is set in a fantasy world inspired by ancient Greek mythology. And it's good to see him go back to creating terrific story-based content, which is what BioWare lost when they were acquired by EA. They sucked that creative energy out of that company, one of my favorite gaming developers ever. And to the extent that people are liberated from there and move on and go back to creating the kinds of games that we love, I think it does us all a lot of good. I don't hold out a lot of hope for BioWare's Anthem or its future titles, but I do track and follow the people that leave there. You know, the other group that left at one point and has been a terrific developer and publisher is Beamdog, which went back and grabbed the rights to a whole bunch of the old BioWare Dungeons and Dragons games and started creating enhanced editions. We have all of those. I actually, have started a few of those games and never finished. In fact, Neverwinter Nights, we partnered with Beamdog for a giveaway, and we gave away maybe 5 copies of Neverwinter Nights Enhanced Edition when that came out. But I've never played it, and I've never played any of these games. My entry into BioWare started with KOTOR, and then I went through, all of the rest of their games that they ever published, including there was a Game Boy Advance game as well, that I think maybe it was a DS game. But, everything since KOTOR that BioWare published, I've been there. And loved most of them up until the time when they were acquired by Electronic Arts. I'm going to say that would have been around the release of Mass Effect 2, which may be one of my favorite games of all time. And then having your favorite developer slowly, I'm going to be over the top here, but it was almost like having a loved one slowly dying from either cancer or maybe a better way of looking at it would be, sort of suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia, where you just see them slowly leaving you. And, it's sad. If you've had an emotional attachment to the games and to the worlds, it is sad to see that happen. And I am very happy to see James leaving, because it gives me some comfort that we may have a rebirth back to some of what BioWare was. And with every death, it creates the fertilizer for new life. And James, we salute your liberation. Welcome back. We'll be back in 10 seconds with what we've been playing. And we're back here on at Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming, episode 0.16. Let's take a look at what we've been playing over the last little while and see if there's been any movement in getting some games finished. I'm right here taking a look at the games I've been playing. And at the top of my list, you can see, is Final Fantasy XII, The Zodiac Age. I am into it for about 39 hours as of yesterday. It's you know what? It is a terrific. It's a terrific RPG. It's it's a game that I played back in the PlayStation 2 games, but never finished, in the PlayStation 2 era. But never finished, and I got into it. It's a JRPG, for good or for bad. All of the things that you like and dislike about JRPGs are going to be included in this game. It's strictly linear. It is has all of the tropes that JRPGs have, but it is a nice reversion back from some of the open world, I'm going to say some of the open world nonsense that's developed in gaming, where for me, I get lost in the middle of 100,000 different alternatives that I have to do when I end up playing a game, and my number of to-dos on it, in terms of the number of quests, are just escalating, and some are minor, and and then you have to collect 100,000 of something, and it just kind of gets to the point where I just get overwhelmed and don't want to play anymore. So going to a linear style, story-based JRPG has been a pleasure. Other than that, you can see here, I launched up Star Trek Bridge Crew primarily to see if it worked on Linux, and I couldn't get it to run. This is playable both in VR and on a regular 2D screen. Clearly the VR is not working on Linux at all. I got basically a pink screen when I ran it via DXVK. I haven't looked into it enough to really kind of try to figure out whether there's a fix or something I can tweak to get it to run. I'm not really inclined to play it, but I sorely miss quality Star Trek based games. There's an MMO, I believe, which was like 10 years old, that is being updated, but and there's a whole bunch of mobile free to play games as well. But I would love to see a new story based Star Trek game. I mean, how great would that be? The universe is just fantastic. You have so much to work with in terms of the Star Trek universe, in terms of stories. And I find it just surprising that we don't have more story-based Star Trek games. I mean, a Star Trek RPG would be fantastic. I would even take an open world game at this point in the Star Trek universe, which would be pretty cool too. But I don't know. I'm not sure who owns the rights. I know that CBS owns the rights generally. I'm not sure who owns the video game rights or why they're allowing that franchise to languish. You can see I launched up both Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition and Icewind Dale. I was really just going back there and taking a look at some of the work that James Ohlen had done. I asked him actually specifically if I was to start with one of these games, which one should I start with, and he suggested Baldur's Gate. So I've got that installed. I'll try to get to that. The rest of these, I think, were just testing games in terms of you can see a bunch of games there that were installed. But my main games now are Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, which I've gone back to and restarted a new game. I'm going to play that on my laptop. Since there's no cloud save, I'm not really inclined to go back and forth and save it to Dropbox and load it back in. I'm just going to play that one kind of on my XPS 13 as my portable game, and then I'll play Final Fantasy 12 on the desktop as my desktop game. And that's it. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about all of these games that I have and what I'm going to play as our focus on topic this week, which is gaming overload. And as if we're not overloaded enough, let's go take a look and see what the Steam store is featuring this week. And I guess the main release right now, or the recent main release, is this Warhammer 40,000 Gladius Relics of War, which is probably the longest name in the history of names. That was released July the 12th, so it's just an extremely recent release. Warhammer 40,000 Gladius Relics of War brings you to a world of terror and violence. 4 factions will engage in a brutal war for dominance over the planet's resources. In the first 4X turn-based strategy game set in Warhammer 40,000, you will lead one of 4 unique factions. Interesting, actually. I did not know that was a 4X strategy game. I might actually be inclined to try it out if I didn't have 100 million other games to actually play. But I will put it to my wish list. It is $45.49 on Steam. There is it doesn't appear to be any sale. There's a deluxe edition for $51.49. The reviews on it are mostly positive. It has 278 reviews, and I'm just going to run the trailer here.
Gladius Prime was once a planet of peace. A prosperous colony of the Imperium. We built and thrived. Then we dug too deep. We found something ancient. A forgotten terror from a bygone era. Then it awoke. And there was only war on Gladius Prime.
Yeah, you know what? That looks interesting. I'm probably going to end up buying it. But, it basically looks like Warhammer Civ or something. Not sure if it's more kind of in the kind of StarCraft kind of real-time strategy or in the Civ 4X, and it's listed as a 4X game, but it kind of looks a little bit to me in terms of the trailer more like an RTS. But either way, I think I'm going to give that a shot when I can basically find some time to play it. And again, maybe that's another part of our discussion for the topic of the week of gaming overload. The other thing here that I will mention is that Steam has apparently updated or improved its upcoming tab. I haven't tried it yet, so let's give it a shot. They're trying to basically improve the discoverability of games on the system, and so they've apparently revamped the upcoming. Let's take a look. Upcoming, all products. Gay Battlegrounds is a Windows-only game that is listed there as upcoming. So these are games that are not released yet. I don't know if this is actually doing me any good because they're not really suited or tied to my tastes. But I can choose SteamOS and Linux. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, that's not a feature that I can use because it doesn't seem to be tailored to me. But let's go take a look and see what else they've got happening here. Let's take a look at new releases, which is my go-to tab. And there we go. This seems to be a little more reasonable in terms of what they've got happening. So they've got Gladius was popular this month, which we've just looked at. They're highlighting something called Ding Dong XL, which is $1.40, $1.19. New content. Is this stuff new? So apparently there's new content for Crusader Kings 2, Hearts of Iron 4, Europa Universalis 4, and War Thunder. New top sellers released this month include, of course, Gladius, Sword Art Online, which is a $6 game. Let's take a look and see what that one is about. It's Sword Art Online, the movie. Is that a movie? Yeah, it is a movie. It is not relevant to me, and I still do not find this stuff useful. All right, let's go down a little bit further. There's got to be a way, and I haven't figured it out, and I would appreciate it if somebody could basically show me how to do it, but is there a way for me to universally just not have any videos? I don't go to Steam to watch videos, and they just intersperse my game discovery with video discovery, and I just find it annoying. So let's kind of focus now instead on popular new releases. And you can see here, so I actually have a filter on for Linux only in terms of my popular new releases, and yet it still shows me the videos. I guess presumably because the videos work on Linux. But be that as it may, popular new releases include Gladius, Rifter. I think Rifter we looked at last week. Rifter is breathtakingly fast and tough as nails. Rifter is an acrobatic platformer drenched in neon and influenced with a pumping 80s synthwave soundtrack. Looks quite epileptic in terms of if you're prone to that. In any case, you know what? This is a good time now to maybe kind of segue into our overload. Although, actually, just before I go into that, one other point. Arma 3 recently. Arma 3 is one of the most popular shooters. It's an older game that goes back to 2013, and it's the basis of a lot of other games in the sense that this was so well supported by the mod community that I believe games like I'm forgetting the name right now, but other games were effectively built using the Arma 3 engine, and including, I think, some of the early battle royale style games. And so this is a popular game. if you are into military shooters, and you can see that it is listed here for Windows, but I have it on good authority, though I have not tried it, that there is a Linux build available, though it's unsupported. And apparently, if you buy the game, you can install the development build rather than the regular build. So you just go into your options there and install the development build, the beta, and that beta runs on Linux. And I think the reason they are not listing it is because it is not fully compatible with the Windows version. And I think they've announced that they're not going to fully support it. So there may not be cross-play, continual cross-play support. In other words, they will update the Windows version first and then get to the Linux version, kind of at some future time. And so when the versions are out of whack, they won't be compatible. But it's a good thing to see big games like Arma 3, even on a stealth basis, coming over to Linux. I'll give a nod over to Skooky Sprite, Best Linux Games podcast, for tuning me on to that. He, in his drunken stupor on his last episode, mentioned that, man, I don't know how much that guy kind of drinks and smokes and dopes and all of that kind of stuff, and then goes on and does his podcast. But you know what? If he can do that in that kind of a state and provide meaningful information, including, actually, if you go over and pop into it, he did a full review of Everspace, which I don't agree with because I'm not a fan of Everspace, but he waxed poetic about Everspace on his last episode. So again, that is definitely an M-rated podcast, which, to be honest, is sometimes difficult to listen to. But if you can work your way through it, there is some decent content on Skooky Sprite. At Vegas Writer is his Twitter handle. You can go and check him out there if you want to figure out what he is. I think he's sometimes streaming on Twitch too. Anyway, we'll be back in 10 seconds with our focus on topic, which is gaming overload. And we're back. Thanks for sticking with us throughout this episode 0.16 of At Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming. And our main focus on topic this week is gaming overload, which I certainly deal with, and I suspect many of you out there deal with it as well. And let me just kind of start here with basically my library. Let's go back. These are just the Steam OS games that I have. And you can see there are literally hundreds of games just on Steam that I have acquired over the years. I think there's a website that you can kind of calculate and see how much you spent. And, literally thousands of dollars. Although it is over, a great number of years. And there's worse things that you can spend your money on. But still, that's thousands of dollars that I've basically spent there. I'm gonna pop into Lutris here, which has my entire library. So Lutris, pop on up, and let's get you running here. So this is these are my games that I own across a number of different platforms. So I've got my Steam games here. I've got my Windows games that are currently loaded. I've got my Linux games. I've got all of the games here, and there is, clearly no way that any human could play all of these games in one lifetime. And yet, we had a Steam sale that I went out and bought probably 10 additional games, not including the ones that I acquired as part of our Steam sale giveaway. And we gave away maybe about another dozen games. But I, picked up, it was a sale, and so I picked up, among the things that I picked up the entire Final Fantasy series, from 3 to 13. I think 14 is an MMO, which I wasn't inclined to buy, and 15 I have already, I have that game on the Xbox One X. And then I bought BattleTech, and then I bought Surviving Mars. And even as I was buying them, I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to get through these games because I have so many. And so I guess the question is that I want to focus on is, why buy more games? I mean, it is reasonable to say that I can never buy a game again and never run out of things to play. I mean, arguably, just with the Final Fantasy 12 games, Robotech plus Surviving Mars, that I bought during the Steam sale, I could probably play those for the next 5 years and never buy another game and never really care because I've bought games that I like that I'm playing. So what is driving us, me in particular, to buying more games when we are already overloaded with content? And I really don't have an answer for that. I wish I could just basically say it's related to this, so stop it. But I don't think it's that simple necessarily. One of the possibilities is that it's a sign of obsessive compulsive behavior. And this is, in its lighter stage, let's say, in its lighter version, obsessive compulsiveness is just you don't have the discipline to basically say no when you just do something obsessive. Most people probably have some level of that at the lighter stages, and then of course it can expand in its further reaches into an actual psychological disorder, which can be problematic, where you have no control over your compulsions, and that can obviously actualize itself in destructive behavior. And when behavior becomes self-destructive, that's when you really should go out and get help. So for me personally, I think there's a light flavor of obsessive compulsive behavior here in terms of going out and buying a whole bunch of games, largely driven more by the fact that I can afford them than by my kind of ability to play them. It's still a problem because if you spend $100 on something that you're not going to use, it's probably not going to make you any better off. And games these days, maybe that kind of stems from the desire to collect games, which I think there's a big part of it, the collection of games, where you just want to have them in your library. But what value is there in the modern world to collecting games that are digital and sitting on somebody else's server anyway? I mean, rationally, you could say, well, I'll just pretend to own it and it'll sit on their server without me having to pay any money until I want to play it. I mean, that's the rational thing to do. There's no reason to buy a game that's digital that you're not going to play until you're going to play it, and then you should buy it. And yet, there I am. Buying the games, and I think there is a collection component to it. There's also an enthusiast component in the sense that I want to buy it, I want to run it, I want to give it a test run, I want to talk about it on the podcast, and I do not run out and get free games for review. I don't really review games on this podcast. And I don't really review games on our Twitch or YouTube feeds. I just kind of play, and I'm interested in things, and I give them a run, and I just talk about it. So I don't get free games. And to the extent that I've given away games, just to be clear, I will go and approach a publisher and basically say, let's do a deal where you give us 5 keys for a game for example, Neverwinter Nights, and we will promote your game to the Linux community, and we will give away. But in those situations, I give away all 5 keys. I don't keep a key for myself. I buy my key, and I might buy a key for one of my sons or both. But I do not keep the keys that they give me to give away. And I look, it's an expensive hobby, so people that get free keys or beg for them or ask for them in order to be able to talk about the games, they provide a service to the publisher in the sense that they are promoting the game. But just be aware that if somebody is getting free stuff, you can't help but be tainted in your views. Even if they say that they're not, you can't help but be tainted. And at least in my view. But anyway, I think that's kind of one thing, is just to basically test them out. So I buy the games to test out, and then I don't really play them. Arguably, the thing to do then would be just to basically return them, because I'm not going to put the 2 hours in and get the money back, and then buy them when I am going to play them, which, again, I typically don't do either, though I think that would be completely legitimate if I were to do that. I guess the second component, in my defense, although I don't think it's a good defense, I think it's kind of a sad stake that I'm getting defensive. But I think the other thing is that I can afford it. So it's to the extent that my behavior is obsessive compulsive, it's not destructive. And so, if as part of my hobby, I like to spend $1,000 a year on buying video games, which is probably what my budget is. That is part of my entertainment budget, and it does not cause me any hardship. And I guess you could argue that, I would argue for sure, that if I wasn't spending the money on that, I'd be doing something else in terms of my entertainment and maybe spending the money elsewhere. And certainly going to bars is probably, more expensive and probably not as good for you than chilling out in front of a video game on a Saturday night. But there is, I think we have to address that there is an obsessive compulsive component to video game collection that could possibly turn to addiction. And there has been some studies, about the addiction to video games. And I think, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, so I'm not going to speak to the veracity of those studies. But clearly, people are prone to becoming addicted to many things. And our brains are also programmed to desire certain types of reinforcement, which is why, for example, the Loot Crate component has become so popular. Publishers, particularly the guys on your mobile phone, don't just make this stuff up. They hire experts in psychology and human behavior, and compulsive behavior, and they design their game to provide your brain with the kind of feedback loop that encourages you to want to press a button to pay some money for the game. And it doesn't matter whether it's Fortnite or PUBG or something on your mobile phone, Candy Crush or what have you, those are designed to feed into obsessive compulsive behavior, possibly also tied to addiction. And, that is a bad thing. And I think the onus ultimately, though, is on ourselves to be aware of it. And I would say the publishers feed into this. Steam certainly feeds into it, through its quarterly Steam sales. I mean, they promote and push the Steam sales on a quarterly basis, and they can track the user statistics. They know who's playing what and how many times, and it's become kind of a running joke in terms of buying games that you don't play. And part of the reason why you buy games that you don't play is because the publishers and the storefronts feed on it. They generate greater revenues by basically feeding into your desire for collection, or the feedback loop of buying a game that you're looking at, or the games that Valve puts around in terms of, putting together these game things where, if you look at a queue, you get some points, you get some cards, you collect some things, all of that stuff is tied into psychological studies that feed into your desire to, at the end of the day, get this positive feedback loop, which is real. It's physical. It exists not just in your brain. It exists, and they know how to take advantage of it. And they do that because it's good for business. They generate more money. And I am not here to basically say that this stuff should be outlawed. I think it's problematic, but I think ultimately it is up to us as gamers to be aware of it and to be reasonable and to make sure that we are not damaging ourselves by feeding into obsessive compulsive behavior that is really driven by somebody's business strategy. And so you and I, as I've done, need to ask yourself, do I need to buy this game? Am I going to play this game? And can I afford it? And what I would recommend that you do is have a budget set out for your gaming hobby. Both for your hardware and your software, I would say. But you could split it out and figure out, this is your entertainment budget, and it goes into your components of other entertainment, including, Netflix, including movies, including bars, including dates, including games, right? And all of that kind of stuff in terms of your entertainment budget. Try to keep it within that. Try to figure out what you can afford and try to keep to your budget. Because for many people, you are going to feed into the strategies, the business strategies of these companies to try to basically feed into obsessive compulsive behavior. And you're going to be prone to it because that's how brains work. And if you're not, you're probably kidding yourself. And so, stick to the budget and try to keep it, keep within it, and just be realistic about whether you're going to play games. I will be the first to say that it is probably hard to do for many of us, including myself, because we're kind of really feeding into it, and I think it's something worth being aware of. Okay, and I think that to the extent that you can take some steps just to mitigate it, you're doing yourself a favor, and possibly minimizing some of the gaming overload that you have, and maybe just maybe you'll have more fun through being a little more restricted in the games that you can access. And I'll be, when I first moved to Linux for gaming, a big part of it was just this idea that, if I limit the number of games that I can play to the games that are available on Linux, maybe reducing the choices that I have will focus me on playing a smaller number of games. And it didn't work, but I've been struggling with it for some time. And maybe you have too. I'd love to hear from you at mostly_Linux on Twitter. You can DM me there, or mostlylinux@protonmail.com if you want to send an email and give me your experiences and thoughts on the subject. You can also go to our subreddit on Mostly Linux. Search for it there, and you can post over there as well. In any case, I'll be back in 10 seconds with some closing comments. And we're back, and that's another show put to bed, episode 0.16. hopefully, you enjoyed the episode and that the sound quality was an improvement with our new mic. I'm actually looking forward to listening to this when I edit it together to see if we've got improvements on the sound quality. Let me just take a few minutes here to talk about how you can find us on the web. You can find us at mostly_Linux on Twitter. That is our main home. We're on there. We're posting. We're going to post the show. We post our comments. We post our thoughts, and we retweet a whole bunch of stuff. You can also reach us on Twitter, on Reddit. Let me just load up our subreddit here, where we are mostly. I'm not sure if you. And there we are. Mostly Linux is our subreddit. No underscore on that. Mostly Linux. You can also find us on Twitch, which is twitch.tv /mostly Linux. That's where this show premieres every Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. You can also find us on YouTube. If you search for @mostly Linux there, you will find our stream. And you will be able to find us on PeerTube as well. Let me just take a quick look on PeerTube. PeerTube.social. Let's run that out and see where we can be found. Let's go to Mostly Linux. Would that be, if that works, that's pretty good for discoverability. Mostly Linux. I'm not typing very well here. Mostly Linux. Yes, there I am. So if you just search for Mostly Linux on PeerTube.social, you will find our videos there as well. And we've seen some pretty good upticks on our on both subscriptions and views and listens, and we thank you very much for all of that. What I would ask, if you don't mind, and if you'll kind of humor me, is give us a like or a thumbs up or a retweet when you're listening or watching or viewing. It helps get the word out. As you can imagine, it's tough getting word out for a new podcast. With a limited audience here. I mean, we're mostly Linux and we're mostly gaming, and it's mostly not going to appeal to most people. So if you do enjoy this, we would appreciate very much a like or a retweet or a thumbs up on any of those venues, or you know what, go to all of them and do it. Okay, you don't have to do that, but I would appreciate it. Anyway, that's episode 0.16. We've put that to bed. You have yourself a wonderful week, and we'll be back next week with another fresh episode of Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming. See you next time.